they were using cyber as a military tool, not as not as a terrorist tool just to like flash and wave around. It was a thing that was helping the military achieve their objectives.
Shortly after the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, I was warned by someone from the security sector that there might be attacks on the electrical grid and other issues coming up soon. Yet from my experience, nothing happened. The question is, did I miss it or did nothing happen? Another question is, what kind of cyber attacks actually make sense? Because there's a clear difference between what is theoretically possible, what is doable, and which attacks are useful militarily and politically. To discuss these points and also previous attacks on logistical infrastructure in Europe, we have as a guest the security expert, the grug.
So one of the things that everyone was expecting, right? Like, this is Russia. They are the cyber power. They do all of these things. They've taken out the grid in Ukraine before. There's a lot of really, really exciting stuff that's going to happen, and everyone was ready for it. So all the people that have been telling us what cyber war is supposed to look like, we're super excited because we were finally going to see a real life cyber war. And then Russia sort of let us down. Instead of playing out the fantasies that these analysts had come up with, they just did things that were strategically useful for what their plan was, And so we didn't see these huge attacks against the grid or against the banks or against any of the civilian infrastructure. What we saw was that the government got, their systems wiped, and it was difficult for them to communicate. The military had their communications cut. The air defense systems were degraded and disrupted. And all of these things were strategically and tactically useful for the plan that Russia was executing, whereas, taking out the power grid or, interfering with just regular people in their day-to-day lives was not useful. Particularly if you think about the sort of the vision they had of the Ukrainians love them and they're going to be welcomed with flowers. So if that's your understanding of what you're going into, you don't want to cut the lights and, destroy the banks. You don't want to cause problems and make people dislike you. So, if you were paying attention to what the Russians were saying, it wouldn't make sense for them to have done those things that everyone told us was going to happen. And when they didn't do it, it made sense that they didn't do those things. They were doing things that were strategically useful, not things that were exciting and flashy. So it was very disappointing, but also I think it speaks to the fact that they were using cyber as a military tool, not as not as a terrorist tool just to flash and wave around. It was a thing that was helping the military achieve their objectives. We need the military to, not be able to communicate. Boom, take that out. We need to have the air systems, air defense systems down. Take that out. We want the government to be disconnected and unable to issue commands. Take that out. These are military objectives done in a sort of military surgical manner. That's it. So I think while we didn't get a cyber Pearl Harbor, what we did get was a clear demonstration of how cyber fits into a military context. And I think that is, in many ways, more interesting.
So basically, a lot of the scenarios that the ATM machines go down and the electricity is more on a cyber terror scale and not on a cyber warfare dimension, unless it makes some real sense for the operations the military would be planning. Because there are probably some scenarios where it makes sense to take down the electrical grid, but or even the banking system to a certain degree. But I mean, one sense for the banking system could probably be if you're able to achieve a disruption of the currency system for 2 or 3 months, and that, for instance, the military doesn't get paid, that the morale drops or something. But that depends, of course, also on the trust of the people in the government, I guess. So that works for some countries. For other countries, it would be probably useless.
Right. And I mean, there are ways that those attacks could fit into an overall strategic plan. But the important thing is, having that strategic plan and then finding attacks that help you achieve those objectives, not going, these are things we can do, let's do them. And I think that a lot of people have looked at cyber from the perspective of like, these are things that could happen, therefore they will happen, rather than from, the point of view of the enemy, which is like, why would they ever want to do that? Like, what is the point of, invading a country, but turning off the electricity so that your troops can't charge their phones and you can't, send, like people won't have TV access, but what you want to do is invade and then get on TV and say, hey, the war's over, we won, right? I mean, it's amazingly wrong-headed to think that that's what would happen, and I'm not sure that terrorist attack is necessarily the right way to think of it, but the thing of like the taking out the power grid or like disrupting the banks or breaking all the ATMs, these are spectacular, they're visual, they are, sort of events that you experience. The military losing their communications backbone, like that's sort of thing that a regular person sort of knows about, right? The military isn't going to announce, oh shit, like we can no longer talk to anyone. I hope we don't get invaded, like that's not going to happen. But if the power goes out, then, something's happened. So they like they are spectacular. They are sort of visual. They're for talking to civilians. And I think, as we've been saying, like, in this warfare context, you don't necessarily need to talk to civilians. You need to have an impact in either a military context or a political context or in some way that helps you advance. So, taking out communications or disrupting the ability of the government to talk to each other or to communicate with their citizens. Useful things like that make a lot more sense in a warfare context.
Yeah, definitely. So it basically could work, for instance, like using those attacks combined with the others to demoralize a country, because you basically everything doesn't work. The military doesn't work, the air defense system doesn't work, no money, no water, no electricity. And it's like, if the enemy has the capability to do this, so basically everyone is like in a complete shock or unable to do anything else, because then you probably also have hard time setting up backup systems or something else. And especially if then the enemy combines this with kinetic strikes against very important infrastructure centers as well, and the computers along those lines. So in that sense, it would make sense, but that is basically overkill. If you can afford it, something probably the United States would do. But besides that power, there's probably not many that could pull it off. Maybe China.
Yeah, like it's a sort of thing that could be done, but really finding like the reality is like these things are possible, but they're not necessarily easy. And it's sort of like a lot of the cyber stuff we talk about and practice and things like that is sort of like learning to fight by going to a gym and only like doing techniques with the instructor, because they're not fighting back. It's very easy. Like, okay, so, you do this and you grab there and look, you can throw him. And then if you do it against someone who's actually trying to resist, suddenly, like, they're not just they don't stand still, they don't fall over. You push them,
the enemy
right?
has a vote.
Exactly. So a lot of these things, when you do them in practice, it's not, it's sort of, on the one hand, it's not as easy, but it's also not as effective in the same ways. Or so, you go and you take out the power grid. And one of the things that, so I've got a big thing. I don't think that power grids are like a good target. I think it's the dumbest thing ever in a lot of ways, because you've probably lived through a blackout and you managed to survive. Like a lot of people have gone hours without electricity. My understanding is that for a huge portion of human existence, people went long periods of time without electricity, without dying. So, I mean, it's bad, but it's not really that terrible. Also, electrical companies experience blackouts all the time. They have problems. And for that reason, they have teams whose job it is to get everything back up and running. So if you were going to attack one piece of civilian infrastructure, the worst one to choose would be the one that has teams on standby, ready to go and fix things immediately.
Yeah.
Like going after the TV stations makes more sense because they're probably not used to the idea of someone actually trying to knock them over. Now, why you'd want to do that, I don't know. But, at least They don't have people on call sitting around, waiting around just to fix things immediately. So yeah, like again, like it can be done, but it's not going to play out like people have sort of imagined, and it's not going to have the effect that people think it will, because a lot of, to a degree, a lot of the impact of these things is just psychological. It's like, oh my god, the electricity's out, and you probably, if it's in the middle of a storm, you'd think, oh, okay, the storm has knocked out the electricity, it will come back. It's not like this is terrifying. The idea that rather than a storm, it's the Russians makes it scary, right? It sort of it amplifies the terror factor of this thing happening. But if they do it 2 or 3 times or 4 times or 5 times, they're going to be a storm. It's like, oh, the Russians again, someone get the candles. It's not a useful attack in the same way as, say, taking out the communication system for the military. Like that's a thing that just works all the time, whereas scaring people, that works until they stop getting scared. So I think, the idea of a lot of these attacks is based on these sort of fantasies of, if I do this and he does that, then I can sort of throw him. And like, that's just not how people actually, like, that's not how the real world really works. There's a lot more complexity involved. So, yeah.
Additionally, I assume it may scare some people, but it probably will also make some people angry that the Russians did it to a certain degree and have a similar effect like bombing attacks in the Second World War, that it actually stiffens the resolve of the population instead of demoralizing it.
Absolutely.
And what would be interesting? I mean, this I have one question here, which is probably of less importance now, since the question is, I remember when my friend warned me, and he works in the industry, he also assumed that we might experience some troubles in Europe and in ATM machines or electric grid or some other stuff, and nothing happened. And we talked about this, and it basically was like, yeah, this only would hurt Russia to a certain degree and would require resources. Of course, now the situation has changed a bit, because from what I understand, Putin's gloves came off, and he said now with the gas sanctions, he turned off completely supplying Europe. So it seems like the conflict might escalate further, which we don't really know. By the way, we are recording this on the 12th of September, so this might be of interest, what happens between this and the release. So would it, if there would be an attack against a member of the European Union or the United States on the cyber domain, let's call it that, what would it be, or is it like complete off?
So we've like, that's a good question, and it's one that I won't say it's kept people up at night. So it hasn't kept me up at night, but it has kept some people up at night. It's very much the idea of like, what happens if Russia decides to use cyber to go after people who are more vulnerable. Europe is a great target for this because the European commitment to the war is less strong than the US. For the US, it's very easy. It's on the other side of the world. They can bleed some money into it. For Ukraine, for Poland, for, these other people, like Ukraine, it's existential. Poland, they're next. Some people are super committed to it, but then, if you go after the people who are not necessarily as deeply committed, and you make the cost of coalition expensive, turning off the gas, raising prices for regular commodities, making everything slower, these are things that could create political pressure from citizens who are like, let's get out of this. And, leave the Ukrainians to, like, this is a problem for Ukraine and Russia, let them sort it on their own. So that's the idea, that, they might try and do this because this will be the reaction. I think there's a couple of reasons why that's less likely. One is, in turning off the gas, Russia has shown itself to be an unreliable partner and to be aggressive and antagonistic. So you're not as likely to be like, well, we'll just leave them alone and they'll leave us alone. Like, Russia's already not left Europe alone. So it's you can look at it, and Russia's idea might be like, oh, they will see that the solution is to be nice to us again because we will help them fix this problem. That's, I think, unlikely. Like if you used cyber to create problems, I don't think Europe is necessarily going to respond by going, oh, we should just be nice to Russia and they will stop being mean to us. The other thing is, I think the success in Ukraine of the Kharkiv offensive recently, that's very good in terms of raising like the political, like just the man on the street being invested in this. So I think that cyber attacks are less likely to be effective because there's a lot of factors against them. What would be available, things that have been proposed would be, obviously the electrical grid, which I think is very unlikely and very dumb. What is more likely is the sort of things that we have seen before. So, Rotterdam would be hit with ransomware and nothing would get in or out for 7 days. Like a 7-day delay at Rotterdam is going to just screw all of the supply lines and huge amounts of the supply chain for the rest of Europe. Similarly, hit Amsterdam and interfere with the port systems there. Doing that in other regions, I think Hamburg is another major port city. These are things that run on computers, that need a lot of computer stuff. They've been hit before. They could be hit again. And
hit during this conflict or when about?
Well, like this comes up as an example because in January, I believe it was January, it was Rotterdam or Amsterdam got hit with ransomware. And everyone was like, in my community, it was all like, oh my God, this is it. Like this is they're practicing. It's going to happen. Like this is what's coming for us. Get ready. And it never happened again. But that is the sort of thing that would make sense. Like we expect that if they do want to do things that raise the cost of coalition, it would be things like, find an LNG, whatever, depot, reservoir, whatever, that's run on computers and interfere with it so that, it can't be accessed for a while. That's going to raise prices, interfere with port systems. These sort of attacks against infrastructure that make regular life more difficult and expensive. That's what you would try and do.
It also makes more sense because, logistically elements, infrastructure, you also have a build-up on everything because with electricity, it either flows or it doesn't flow. But once you clog up a logistic port system or something else, then also the trains follow and everything else. So yeah, that's actually a major difference between the two systems and how they act differently.
Yes, absolutely. The other thing that you've hit on there is like a lot of places are based on these just-in-time deliveries. Like you don't have huge warehouses of stuff inside cities because you have them outside where you can just ship it in. And if it gets congested outside, then like the everything starts getting in the way of everything else.
The whole supply chain system breaks down.
So that if they decide to do it, that is probably the sort of thing that they would try and do. They've done it before. This was just a ransomware group. It wasn't state sponsored. It was just people making money. But one assumes that, the Russians are intelligent enough to say, we are trying to achieve this. What are things that we can do with our available resources and assets to achieve that? The main thing is just like, it's a military tool. They're using it for warfare, not for impressing you and your friends. They want to, they're trying to win a war, not, get the best special effects award for Hollywood.
Thank you very much for the information.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye.